Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth.
All right, you good people, you very, very smart people, thank you for joining me. If you hear a little bit of skipping, popping, they're, internet questions. The pipes were made of chocolate as a joke, so sometimes they go down. Listen, I know you are smart. You are very, very smart people because you're here. You're here watching this, listening to me. The other folks, they're out there watching reruns of, last week's MILF Manor or The Bachelor season 27 or Real Housewives of New York City season, what are they on? Season 14. Boy, if the existence and persistence of those shows, if that's not a case for pessimism, I don't know what is. But then again, when I was young, we had dumb television too. The stupidest things were on television, but you don't remember the stupid stuff. You only remember the real quality stuff like The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. Great shows. But you high IQ types, I want to share my biggest professional weakness. And I think some of you will recognize this. In my career, my biggest weakness, my recurring biggest weakness was planning and organizing. Now, as I understand it, this is a problem a lot of high IQ people have. And it's because they can hold a lot in mind. In The New Left, the anti-industrial revolution, in the essay, The Comprachicos, heartbreaking. But Ayn Rand stated, quote, "Intelligence is the ability to deal with a broad range of abstractions," unquote. In the same volume, In the Metaphysical versus the Man-Made, Rand wrote, "Intelligence is the ability to grasp the facts of reality and to deal with them long range, i.e. conceptually," unquote. So intelligence, and again, I know you are one of the most intelligent audiences in video podcasting. You're not out there watching the junk. You're here listening to the folks on the Ayn Rand Center UK. Intelligence like masculinity is all good. I should say intelligence like masculinity and femininity is all good. With masculinity, the so-called toxic masculinity, it's just a failure mode. It's not masculinity, it's doing masculinity wrong. And so too with intelligence. Ignorance definitely is not bliss, but really, really smart people do have their failure modes. Overthinking and analysis paralysis and failure to plan and organize, my particular favorite. And over abstraction, one that I don't do as much as I used to, but that's what I want to talk about. Now that planning and organizing part. See, James Valiant and I discussed this yesterday, Peak Off Wednesdays. Leonard Peikoff was asked about job interviews and how to answer this question, which if you've ever gone on a job interview, you've heard this question more times than you wanted to. What's your greatest weakness? And now my favorite answer, I'm often too tenacious. It's hard for me to go home at 5 o'clock, leave the office when a project's not complete and there's more to do. Answer with a weakness that is actually going to play into what they want from you. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes it's hard to do it without making it obvious what you're doing. But in fact, in my job interviews, the real weakness, if I'm honest, and I'm always honest, but if I'm being really open, my biggest personal weakness is planning and organizing. This was in my job reviews, and most of the jobs I've had, planning and organizing on a scale from 1 to 10, not a 10. And here's why. And you might recognize this because I can get a lot done with very little planning and organizing. I can hold a lot in my head and just wing it and often get great results. And I've had to discipline myself to properly plan and properly organize, proper P&O, because no matter how good I am at improvising, I'm still better if I don't shoot from the hip. The other big failure mode of really smart people, and one that hits philosophical types and idealists, harder than normal folk, is over abstraction, over idealism floating. in the personal development field, self-improvement, in the coaching communities, in podcasts about personal success. There's a great question that comes up. You've seen the title of this episode. You have already figured out I'm talking about. What does that look like? I might have first heard the expression, or at least it comes to mind, from listening to Tim Ferriss on his podcast episode number 255 on how to turn failure into success. Look that one up. This is a combined episode. He shares conversations with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Malcolm Gladwell and Brian Johnson and AJ Jacobs and Shep Gordon on turning failures into success. And that question comes up repeatedly. It might be Ferriss's favorite question. What does that look like? He asks this often and in all different contexts. So on yesterday's episode of The Daily Objective, episode number 726, Nikos Sotirakopoulos shared 3 videos that changed his life and what made them effective. And I thought that they're good examples of powerful videos. And what made them so good for me was that they were grounded. They were about reality and in clear ways that anybody could connect to. The 3 videos, if you haven't watched that episode yet, Bjorn Lomborg did his Global Priorities Bigger Than Climate Change. So how could there be bigger priorities than climate change? Listen to that episode or watch that video. Then there was the video of I Pencil. Many of you will know that from Leonard Read's article from way back when, all the complexities it takes to make a pencil happen and how, for example, no one person, a government control person, for example, could make that all happen. And then the third video, Hans Rosling's 200 countries, 200 years, 4 minutes. This is super tight history, differences between countries told through statistics. Brilliant. So there was a super chat question about the videos. And the super chat question suggested, well, but they're all about concretes. They're all concrete bound, pragmatic. They're not explicit or consistent. They're not, need more coffee. They're not explicit or consistent in their advocacy of capitalism, of free market solutions. But as Nikos observed, well, no, they're not explicitly about principles. They are grounded in reality. But speaking for myself, this is not a weakness. This is a strength. And it's not necessarily a pragmatic argument to make a point based wholly on facts and then let your audience reach the conclusion. And I tell you flat out, like many of us, I have made the mistake of not always keeping my thinking and my advocacy and my arguments grounded in facts of reality, the real world out there. But, at least I'm aware of the possibility, that failure mode. So I do try to stay grounded. And why is that important? What's in it for you? Because over abstraction, idealism, scholasticism, living in a world of ideas with no sense of the real world out there, it leads to all sorts of pointless thoughts and useless conversations and to endless clashes with reality. But even worse, what would be worse than that? On the personal side, it leads to uncertainty about real life and resentment and frustration and guilt. Just consider the latter, guilt. You, and I'm speaking to 98% of you out there, I'm certainly speaking to myself, you are not John Galt. And until you are, you should feel inadequate, not good enough, ashamed, guilty. But no, the rocking chair is the wrong place to finally be proud of yourself, to finally be proud of your achievements. You know what I mean by the rocking chair? When you are 98 years old, life extension is coming. When you are 148 years old, sitting on your rocking chair at the very end of your life, That is the wrong place to finally be proud of yourself, to finally be proud of your achievements, to finally take time to enjoy yourself and celebrate your awesome self. This is a real thing. I know people who are living that life. I've been asked in ways both subtle and really extreme by objectivists and other kindred spirits. Well, how can I feel good about myself before I have achieved not only moral and professional and personal perfection, but all of my goals and ideals? There's no rest for the wicked. But the reality is, the real world out there, the reality is every good thing you do, every small step toward a goal, and every moment that is an end in itself pleasure is valid and is an occasion for pride. It would be irrational beyond belief to withhold your pleasure and your pride until the very end of your life. And then to say, well, okay, now I can let go of all the pressure and the anxiety and the guilt and finally say, okay, good job. One moment, that one moment of self-acceptance before my heart stops beating and they toss my body into a black vinyl body bag and cart me off to the morgue. A good life, a life of integrity and productivity. Back to the question, what would that look like? What does that look like? In reality, day to day, you in a real house with a real body and real biological needs and real psychological needs and friends and family, people and career and hobbies and activities and interests. A good life. What does that look like? Not abstractly. I love the abstract. We need role models. We need heroes. We need fiction, but not abstractly. What would a real good life? What would a real person, what would you look like? Right here, right now. So there's lots of personal advantages in getting this right. What does a real, successful, happy personal life look like? Wait, a real, okay, successful, happy personal life. What does that look? Well, that I can do. And then I can look at John Galt and be inspired. I can look at Howard Roark and say, yeah, that's what I'm shooting for. But the reality is I'm already there because I'm on that road. And there is no, oh, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm there. I think you are too. But there's more. What about the philosophy stuff? And no, I don't mean personal philosophy, although we'll talk about that, but the political philosophy, philosophical advocacy. We've got to save the world. These ideas could save the world, and we've got to make sure that happens. Well, let's talk about that. But first, I got to give a shout out because Jeff Bannister is in the super chat. Jeff, you are always awesome. And I don't know, I thought you said you were on a budget lately and you were going to be pulling back, but you are once again supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK, giving, in Yaron Brooks' words, well, in anybody in Objectivism's words, value for value, and that is super awesome. So thank you for that. If any of the rest of you listening right now would like to support the Ayn Rand Center UK, you know what to do. Or maybe you don't. Click that $ at the bottom of the chat. You can ask a question, make a comment that will stand out and be highlighted, and any dollars, pence, pesos, whatever you put toward your super chat question, it goes to the Ayn Rand Center UK. It's very cool. We had a sponsored episode of the Daily Objective earlier today. That's cool too. You could contact Rosie Ginsburg or anybody at the Ayn Rand Center UK, aynrandcenter.co.uk, to find out how to sponsor a whole show. But put in a super chat today, and there it is. You are sponsoring the Ayn Rand Center UK. So thank you for that, Jeff. Very much appreciated. Now, in a conversation I mentioned last week on the show, the question was asked among objectivists: does laissez-faire capitalism mean no rules and no laws? Well, it's a great question. And the answers were very instructive. And some of the answers were clearly floating. These are not people who asked, what does that look like? For example, somebody commented, well, if everyone was honest, ethical, moral, then there would be no need for rules or laws. This commenter went on to say, unfortunately, people are not, and we need the law and rules to protect us. I mean, I get it. And I agree with Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged when, her protagonist, shouldn't be giving spoilers, we'll just say the protagonist states, there is no conflict of interests among men, neither in business, nor in trade, nor in their most personal desires, if they omit the irrational from their view of the possible and destruction from their view of the practical. Unquote. That guy. But the scope of possible legal disputes between honest men, it's enormous. The types of relationships, personal and professional, and contracts and agreements and rentals and purchases, and what happens in the case of accidents and liability. And I could go on for a long time. Law is complex, even in an ideal world. And if we're going to advocate successfully for laissez-faire capitalism or anything else, our principles need to be clear, but our application needs to appreciate and address that enormous complexity. Otherwise, we are talking out our hat. Now, my answer to that question, a laissez-faire capitalist government will have almost as many laws as we have now, and many of the same mechanisms will be in place to enforce them, though many of the alphabet agency's functions will be farmed out to private companies in an array of public-private partnerships. If you're going to sue somebody for poisoning you, obviously there needs to be a way to provide evidence for that in court. Well, there's not going to be an FDA. We don't need an FDA, just like we have private organizations right now handling the definition of terms. And there can be those public partner partnerships. But the point is, simplistic answers aren't going to cut it. Principles matter. But then we need to be able to say the principle of laissez-faire capitalism, of freedom, of liberty, of a private economy, it's not going to be simple. It's going to be simpler than what we've got now. But established law, it'll all be on the books. Precedent has been set in mostly rational ways. I know you think, what about the laws they pass now? But look at legal precedent. That ain't going away, and it shouldn't go away. Now, one more way in which I want to apply this idea of, okay, what does that look like? What about our pessimism? Doom and gloom, because I want to wrap up with that. This is going to be a quick show. After my show with James Valiant, a questioner in the comments after the show asked, great info, thanks, but you don't think that we are that far gone yet? That we may have to vote for a Trump? Would love to hear your reasons and how you reconcile your objectivism with passive acceptance of Biden. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Well, first of all, taken at face value, the question is enormously insulting, but I'll assume it wasn't intended that way. How do I reconcile my objectivism with passive acceptance of Biden? Answer. What on earth makes you regard anything about me as passive? I know not everybody knows Robert Nasir well enough to know what I do and what I have done to fight irrationality and altruism and collectivism and to fight for reason and individualism and capitalism. But even if you only know me from my shows on the Ayn Rand Center UK, or my personal YouTube show, 5 Minutes with Robert and Amy Nasir, every Sunday night at 6 o'clock Eastern, or my monthly meetings and annual conferences with Great Lakes objectivists, or if you've only seen photographs of me standing on the roadside, holding up signs, marching in protest, and yes, including at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or videos of me speaking at rallies or running the glow booth at Tea Party rally. Well, passive, I ain't. But worse, my passive acceptance of Biden? the closest I came to anything resembling this, I did make this point. Joe Biden, this middle of the road, milquetoast Democrat, is president. The Democrats, who the pessimists believe are now the worst they've ever been, they did not nominate, much less elect, Bernie Sanders, the avowed socialist. No, Joe Biden calls himself a capitalist. He is not. But the point is, they didn't elect Bernie Sanders. They didn't elect or even nominate somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Or not even the nominees were elected. Pete Buttigieg, Kristen Gillibrand, Kamala Harris could not get the nomination for president. She was clever. She took VP. The Democrats didn't want any of that. They wanted the milquetoast. They wanted the middle of the road guy. No, I don't accept Joe Biden. Not passively and not in any other way. I fight Joe Biden. In fact, the bottom line is I also fight Donald Trump for many reasons, but first and foremost, because he is the biggest obstacle to me fighting Joe Biden. Trump is the de facto leader of the Republican Party, and this, combined with his well-earned lack of moral and intellectual and ideological credibility, any kind of credibility, this makes him not an ally, but an obstacle. It's not even a question of, is Donald Trump worse than Joe Biden? Donald Trump is in the way of fighting Joe Biden. Here, I have a note here from the John Galt line, posted this bit ago. The left is unquestionably a menace, which is why I always say I could forgive Donald J. Trump for a lot if he would just, to steal a phrase from Ayn Rand, get the hell out of my way. Think of this hypothetical. I shouldn't go on a rant about Trump, but I'll do it anyway because people say they like my rants. Of course, the only people who say they like my rants are the people who say they like my rants. But tell me I'm wrong about this in the chat if you like. If Donald Trump could save America, if Donald Trump could save this country, but it meant relinquishing the spotlight, if he really could make America great again. But, that meant somebody else would get even part of the credit. He would let this country burn before he would do that. He would let America become a lake of fire before he would relinquish the spotlight and let somebody else get credit for saving it. By my best judgment, that's exactly the situation we're in. My only hope is that enough Americans on the right and the blue dogs, the Democrats who supported Trump and have supported better Republicans in the past, I hope they see it that way too. Donald J. Trump could save America, or at least clear the way for it to be saved, but he won't. So I'm hoping that the electorate will finally get sick of him and retire him. The evidence is not good for that. It may be later than I think in that regard. And here's the thing. I may be wrong. I regularly revisit my understanding of this, and people have had those conversations with me, and I may be wrong. I am willing to revisit it, and that's the point. I am willing to revisit that. And whether my political strategy is right or wrong, I do know this much. Our political situation, it's a result. It's an effect. It's not a cause. It is the result of something more fundamental than the political news of the day. The reality is that people actually believe what they believe, implicitly or explicitly. They believe what they believe about reason versus faith and unreason. They believe what they believe about individualism versus altruism and collectivism, about capitalism versus socialism. And what they believe, that is what explains what they do and what they say and what they advocate and who they vote for. No matter how bad things get, and they are not that bad, but we'll leave that aside for a moment. No matter how bad things get, this is a war of ideas. There's no other explanation for the world right now. You know, even though there is pragmatism and there is power lust, and folks can claim, well, yeah, it's all pragmatism, it's all power lust. Ideas don't matter. Even with our least ideological leaders, they only win when they win based on what their supporters believe about reality. Which takes us right back to the question of the day. What does that look like? You know, in 1980, the Republicans took the presidency after 4 years of Jimmy Carter. 12 years later, after Ronald Reagan and George Bush, the Democrats took the White House back. 8 years on, a Republican is back in the Oval Office for 8 years, and then a Democrat for 8 years, and a Republican for 4 years, and now a Democrat's been there for 2 years. In Congress, it's the same cycles. It sometimes lasts longer one way and sometimes shorter, and then another way. If you really believe this is just a war between the left and the right, or more tribally and United States centric, between the Democrats and the Republicans, the reality, look out there, not the news, but look at the actual world out there. The reality is that neither side has won and neither side is winning. Look at reality. Look at the stats. You know, watch that Hans Rosling video that Nikos recommended, or just read or reread Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, or any of the large number of contemporary books which actually look at the facts of reality right up to this present post-COVID moment. If you really think this is the end of the world, tell me what that looks like. And then look at the facts on the ground. I don't know, I hear somebody saying, but Trump was just indicted. That's the circus. There are 8 billion people in this world. The clown show is just a part of that. One part of it. So what would a successful world look like? A world in which new businesses are opening and established businesses are continuing to operate. From professional services to retailers to coffee shops and bakeries and mechanics and consultants and attorneys and doctors and musicians and dancers and comedians and rock stars and movie stars and let me take my breath. I could go on. And you and me, all doing what they are doing. In a world that looks like a story of opportunity and success and mixed opportunity, mixed success. Not capitalism, the unknown ideal, but nothing at all like We the Living, much less 1984, A Brave New World. What that looks like, that world of success and opportunity, looks like the world right now, right here. And some of us, certainly everybody listening to me right now, some of us have it substantially better than others. Now, I was going to hold up my copy of OPAR, but it is out of arm's reach. Some of us, we are armed with the not so secret manual for success. We have this philosophy. We have this massive advantage. I know, ignorance is bliss. We can see all the problems in the world, and it makes us angry and outraged and feel helpless and feel pessimistic about the future. My hope is that you can see beyond the news of the day and see what the rest of the world looks like. And there is politics, and there is crime, and there are some trends that are alarming. And the whole rest of the world is people doing what people do, living their lives just as we should, and we should be doing it better than most. Look, there's bad guys and there's good guys out there. And you've got to know about the bad guys, and you've got to be prepared for that. But that is a lesser matter. The greater, larger, more important matter, you get to decide every morning whether you are the good guy or gal or you are the bad guy. You get to decide whether you are the protagonist or the antagonist. And more, you get to decide not necessarily who all the other players are, but you get to decide, you get to determine how much they matter. You know, are Joe Biden and Donald Trump and Andrew Tate and Elon Musk, are these people in your script? And if so, are they the stars or are they bit players? And how about those bakers and mechanics and baristas and movie stars and athletes and doctors and musicians? You are writing the screenplay of your life. Who is the star? Who are your co-stars? And who are the extras? You are writing the screenplay of the one precious life you've got. What's the question? What does that look like? Now, get to it.